He had some injuries to his left shoulder. He had a cut near his lip. We could see his mouth was a little. And then Sarah jumps in here and says, I haven't laid a hand on him. I also, too, he fell off my son's bike, so I don't know. And he's notorious for running into the wall or injuring, so I. All right, so she wasn't accused of anything, and she cut them off. This speaks to knowledge of guilt. If it takes too long for somebody to respond to something that they know the answer to, then that means they're trying to create a deceptive answer. If somebody answers too quickly, it means that they've already thought of the answer and they're just waiting for that question, and they have a tendency to cut the interrogator off. Okay, this statement, it starts off with a negative. I haven't. And she says, laid a hand on him. Now, what does it mean to lay a hand on somebody? Okay, this goes back to hearing the gunshot in the kitchen. I didn't lay a hand on him. Well, we already know that she did touch him at some point during that day. When she says, I didn't lay a hand on him, that is factually incorrect. So we're not going to read into this, which the intent here is to make us read into it and believe that she didn't injure his shoulder or cut his lip. This is right out of the gate. So we're making notes on this. We're not jumping to conclusions yet, but this is a very suspect statement right out of the gate here. So I also, too, this is a fragment. She says too, then she says I, he. We have a changing pronoun here. So we got I, he fell off my son's bike. That's past tense. This means that this probably did happen, but she's well aware that it didn't result in any injuries. She's telling you something that factually happened, but is irrelevant to the statement here. You have I, he fell off my son's bike. So that's an explanatory statement. I don't know. An explanatory statement that is followed by a negative statement that's highly sensitive and most likely deception. I don't know is also a reduction in commitment. She says, so I don't know. And that's a sentence fragment because it cuts off. And she says, and he's notorious for running into the wall or injuring. And then she says, so I. Now, it's a little bit of a garble here. There could be another word in here. So he's notorious for running into the wall. This statement itself is meaningless. You're going to probably want to say, look, anybody who says he's notorious for running into the wall or injuring himself, I think she says injuring himself, you're going to say, she's lying. Everyone knows she's lying. Well, in this case, yes, you are correct here. But when somebody says he's notorious for running into the wall, that is not deception from the verbiage. That just sounds stupid. But this is not an indicator of deception. Now, it doesn't mean that we're going to believe her, because when a statement is deceptive, it screams deception. And we have a lot of indicators to look at here. And this just adds an element of humor to a deceptive statement. So I, he is changing pronoun, which is a strong / objective indicator of deception. One thing that I do want to focus on more heavily, I have a tendency to skip over this, is when an interrogator asks a question, the first part of it, the direct answer to the question, is not an open statement. It's the answer. We want to notate where the answer itself begins and ends. There was actually no question here. So there is no answer because there's no question, which means this is just an open statement. They are explaining to her that he had injuries, and she decides to jump in. And even though you can tell she didn't rehearse the actual words that she's saying, she was prepared to deal with that question, and she wanted to cut it off as soon as possible. So what do we actually have here? I haven't laid a hand on him. The fact that she took the time to make an attempt to answer the question, but that she very specifically chose not to say that she didn't cause those wounds, just by itself, it's a very strong indicator that those wounds are from her. Then you get a bunch of fragments here, changing pronoun, and then explanatory plus a negative. There's no doubt in my mind that the wounds came from her. We know that there's deception in there, and that she's giving a very strong indicator at that point that she was involved in at least injuring him before he got into the suitcase. So there's a scratch on the back of his neck going straight across. Again, that is a statement. That is not a question. But she doesn't get cut off. Interrogators, if you're going to ask questions, just making direct statements and seeing what comes from that. Like, if I was being interrogated, I would be sitting there just waiting for the question mark. If an interrogator says there was a scratch on the back of his neck that went straight across, and then there's silence, if I also just sit there in silence, that's not an indicator that I'm being deceptive. because the interrogator hasn't asked a question yet. This isn't a question or an accusation. So it's not necessary for her to say, I didn't do it. And that's the big problem here. Now there's the insinuation of an injury here. If she would have said there was a large scratch across the back of his neck, there's no possible way that that was from falling off of a bike. Are you the one who scratched the back of his neck? And how did you do it? Now, that's an accusation. It's a question. It's an accusation. At that point, you're going to get the subject either saying, I didn't do that, or they're going to begin to be deceptive. But when there's no answer required, then what you get is hard to interpret. Okay, so she says, I have no idea what that's from. What do we get from this? I have no idea what that's from. This is not an indicator of truthfulness or deception, because that could be true and it could not be true. It depends on how she talks, because this isn't not, this is no. So saying, I have no idea, it sounds like a little bit of overemphasis, where you would expect someone to say, I don't know where that came from. She's overemphasizing, but it is technically not deceptive because there's no question here. So we get nothing from this. They're all recent. It wasn't something that occurred post or that occurred 3 days ago. They definitely occurred the night leading up to when he was, I don't know her name, but the female interrogator here, she is nervous about saying, she literally won't say murdered or killed. She just trails off. She says, they definitely occurred the night leading up to when he was. And then she's nervous about saying killed, and she trails off. The problem with that is that the interrogator has to amp up the stress. If the interrogator is not increasing the stress for the subject, it allows the subject to take a breath. The biggest mistakes that you'll see from interrogators are them pretending to be angry or getting angry to increase stress, when in reality, that doesn't increase stress in everybody. That is a sign of poor emotional intelligence on the part of the interrogator. So you want to increase stress, but being angry doesn't necessarily do that. What does that? Just asking good questions. Questions that put somebody into that pressure point, that moment when there's something that happened and they have to lie about it or they're going to go to jail. If I just keep putting you right back into that situation, the stress becomes overwhelming and you have to move in certain ways to get that nervous energy out. And it takes a lot of mental energy to keep coming up with false narratives. And you end up getting tired and worn out mentally. You just got to keep the emotional stress going, but it has to be done by speaking aggressively, but not angrily. Angrily? Not being angry. Okay, they're all recent. It wasn't something that occurred post, which means after death, or that occurred 3 days ago. They definitely occurred the night leading up to when he was. And then we get, in all honesty, we have not gotten into it. Okay, that's why I like. The only thing I thought you guys were going to ask me about, which I was going to tell you anyway, are the scratch marks on his back. Everything else, I have no idea what it is. No idea what it is. Nonetheless, I have had my son over at the house too. So, okay, let's look at this. She says, in all honesty. When somebody says in all honesty, that means that it could be embarrassment. And in this case, it could have been embarrassment, because she says, we have not gotten into it. She's insinuating that they haven't fought, but that's the proper use of that. So she could be embarrassed about that, but she has to double stamp it. This is not repeating a word. This is double stamping a statement. She says, in all honesty, we have not. You can see the overemphasis in the all honesty, and then the overemphasis again in the uncontracted have not. And she does like to use contractions. She uses them a lot. So every time she uncontracts, that's very important to us. We have not gotten into it. So we know definitively that they have gotten into it. Okay, that's why I like. And then she trails off. That's a sentence fragment. That's an indicator of deception from her. The only thing I thought you guys were going to ask me about, okay, this is interesting. She has a stream of consciousness that she's saying out loud. This is not something that you as a guilty person should say out loud. This is something you should think in your head and keep to yourself. The only thing I thought you guys were going to ask me about, which is what I was going to tell you anyways, are the scratch marks on his back. Everything else, that little insight into what she was preparing for is definitely an indicator of deception and of guilt. But why is that? Because the way she talks about it, she's saying, which I was going to tell you anyways, are the scratch marks on his back. Everything else, I have no idea what it is. If you read the whole thing, then it's easy to insinuate what she wants you to. But when you're going to a police interview, you should expect that they're going to ask you a bunch of questions about his background, especially when you've already admitted that you zipped him into the suitcase. You should be expecting a lot of questions and a lot of information to come out. So when she tells you what she was prepping for, that is a strong indicator of knowledge of guilt. Everything else, I have no idea what it is. No idea what it is. She double stamps it again. So now the phrase no idea what it is, it's taking something that is plural and making it singular, which is not necessarily an indicator of deception, but it's an indicator of a misperception of reality. While that's problematic, it wasn't an indicator of deception until she double stamped it. Now we know that it is an indicator of deception. Nonetheless, I've had my son over at the house too. The next question here, the interrogator says, so we're talking about Sunday. She didn't have her kid over at the house on Sunday because she's saying that she had her kid over at the house, so she couldn't have intentionally killed him because her son was there and her son would have noticed, except that her son wasn't there. She gets caught in a lie here. So we can see that she's playing fast and loose with the truth. And then the interrogator says, so we're talking about Sunday. Okay, so yes, the interrogator caught her in a lie right here. Yes, that's great. You caught her in a lie, but this is not a question. She says, so we're talking about Sunday. Without asking a question, you're only going to get what she's going to volunteer to you. Now, if in this case, Sarah Boone basically volunteers all of the information. So you'd have to be a really shockingly bad interrogator to not be able to get the full story out of Sarah Boone here. And I will tell you that by the end of this, the interrogators did more harm than good to the case here, which it doesn't even seem possible. If they wouldn't have interrogated her, they would have had a stronger case going into court. And then she says, that's why thoroughly confused. We have a missing eye. So she's not confused about anything because we had a good time sitting on the back porch, having wine and smoking a couple of cigarettes, and then decided to go inside. So we have a missing either I or we here, which is another indicator of deception. Then decided to go inside and literally paint. Okay, that literally is an unnecessary word. It's not an indicator of deception, but it's an unnecessary word. And so when we get unnecessary words in here, we want to pay attention. So literally paint, do puzzles, and play and listen to music. That's why nobody got out of sorts. Let's see here. She says nobody. Nobody got out of sorts. She doesn't say we didn't fight. We didn't have an argument. There's literally 10 different ways she could have phrased this without having to resort to overly generic terminology. So we want to notate this here. That's why nobody got out of sorts. This is what's mind-blowing to me. Like, I have no clue. Nobody laid a hand on anybody. So now it's kind of like that story, that crazy story that I was giving you. Nobody laid a hand on anybody. There's just everything is wrong with this because laid a hand does not mean hit. I just want to emphasize that it's a meaningless phrase. And because it's a meaningless phrase, it has a ton of meaning because it means that she did hit him because she has a lot of opportunity here to say that she didn't, and she can't say it. That's why thoroughly confused, because we had a good time sitting on the back porch, having wine and smoking a couple of cigarettes. This part is truthful. I just want to show that there is truthful stuff in here. We had a good time sitting on the back porch, having wine and smoking a couple of cigarettes. It is part of an over-explanation, but she does use we, and she uses past tense. Here we have a pronoun. We have past tense. We had a good time. I put that in here as a note for baseline. I want you to see that her baseline is normal. She does speak the truth like a truthful person, and she does speak deceptively the same way that a normal person does. Now, he also had, like, on the left side of his forehead, he had basically bruising and, like, his head and skull. And she says, I have no idea. What she's probably saying is, I have no idea what you're getting at or what you're saying. But he had basically bruising and, like, his head and skull. That's, again, there's no question here. So there's no reason that she would have to respond to this. as if something hit him. Again, not a question. There's too much insinuation here. There's no excuse for this. If you've had literally any training at all, any training, you should know that every single one of these should end with a question mark. And of everything that we've looked at so far, she hasn't actually asked a single question. She didn't finish that sentence. She trailed off there. That's period. Okay, no, so not a question yet. As if something hit him. And she says, I have not touched him. I have not touched him. I have not touched him. Okay, so this tells us a few things. Now, first off, this is uncontracted. So there's no accusation here. This does work in our benefit here. Because there's no accusation, there's no reason to uncontract this. If she had been directly accused numerous times at this point, then you would see this uncontracted and the repeating of words. But there's technically no accusation. She doesn't even using the word killed or murdered. So there's literally no accusation. Even the insinuation is mild. The most that she would admit to would be to scratching him at this point. So this over angry sort of response is more in line with borderline personality than it is with somebody's natural anger building because they're not being believed when they say the truth. She triple stamps this, which is grossly overemphasizing. And they're all uncontracted. Have not is the wrong tense. This should be, actually, I didn't touch him, or I didn't hurt him, I didn't hurt him, I didn't hurt him, would be a far more truthful way of saying this. But I have not touched him. It's the wrong tense. Touched doesn't mean hit. It means touched, and touching doesn't leave marks. So just the words alone are not truthful. Repeating this phrase is not subconscious, which means this overemphasis was intentional. Repeating it 3 times is hugely problematic, especially at this point in the interview. We're still at the beginning of the interview here. And then, of course, it's uncontracted. Now, yeah, I think the last physical was probably, this is from the interrogator. I think the last physical, what she means is the last physical altercation, but any word that insinuates violence, the interrogator is just uncomfortable with. So instead of saying murdered or killed before, and instead of saying abused, or I'm not sure, the last physical confrontation, she just leaves those words out. Yeah, I think the last physical was probably, you said, I think a month ago, where you got the injury, right? You said that was a month ago. Okay, at least we have a question. She says a few weeks, give or take. Okay. That was the last physical altercation between the two of you. Oh, finally, we got the word altercation in there. You said a month ago he hit you with a curtain rod. She says, yeah, a curtain rod. No, it's like it's the last time he got out of jail. Like, we've been good, and he's been having his classes, and he's seeing his probation officer, who's amazing. Okay, this is in the present perfect tense, which is an indicator of disassociation or mental illness. If you had just listened to me read that, it probably doesn't sound all that wrong. It doesn't sound all that problematic. But listen to this again. Like, we've been good, and he's been having his classes. When I read this, I thought, did I accidentally look up an interview of when she had been arrested before his murder? Like, I actually got pretty confused in here. And the reason that using the wrong tense is problematic is just exactly for that reason, because you get confused, and it's because they're misrepresenting the truth. So we've been good. We have been good. And he has been having his classes. And he is seeing his probation officer, who's amazing. Let's see. We've been good. Is there any way that this contraction would be past tense? So we have is the only possible word. That's present perfect tense. And he's been having. He was been having. No, that again has to be has. He has been having his classes. So this is present. This can't be was. And he's seeing his probation officer, who's amazing. So why did I say that this is a dissociation or an indicator of mental illness? Because he's dead. And she said that he is seeing his probation officer. So in her mind, he's not dead. Today, he's not doing any of those things. This could be borderline personality disorder, where she has created a fantasy reality and she can't differentiate that from actual reality. People with borderline personality, they will often conduct extreme acts of violence as a punishment. This mental illness does not cause a disassociation with understanding what death is, but in the moment, they're thinking, I'm going to kill you because that's the worst thing that they can do to you. And then tomorrow, because I've done the worst thing that can possibly happen to you, you're going to repent and you're going to kiss my feet. And there's a bit of a disassociation there. Interrogator says, no, you said you guys have been good. What's your definition of good? She says, I've been good. I don't think you all understand. He comes at me all the time. He comes at me. So it's either I leave or try to go upstairs and go to sleep. That's usually what it is. And I don't know if you talk to Brian about it, but most of the time when I sleep, I go over there. So, and then she gets cut off. This is not over explaining what she did 3 months ago. She's explaining what happens at the time of violence. And then the interrogator cuts her off. You said you guys have been good. And she says, I've been good. What that means is that he hasn't been good. And then she says, I don't think you all understand. Okay, that doesn't actually mean anything. He comes at me. So this is present tense, which means that's not from memory. And then he comes at me. So she repeats it. She double stamps it again, overemphasis. Overemphasis has become a deception tag for her. And it's in present tense. We have an explanatory statement. It's either I leave. That's a sign of conflict. She's saying when they have conflict, she either tries to go upstairs to go to sleep. That is usually what it is. And I don't know if you talk to Brian about it. So this is just an added in statement. I don't know who Brian is. But most of the time when I sleep, I go over there. I wanted to know who Brian is. I wanted her to keep talking here. So she changed we to I. That's deception. This should be we've been good. That is very problematic. She answered the question and everything after that is an open statement. We want to keep that in mind. You said you guys have been good. What's your definition of good? And she says, I've been good. Because she doesn't answer the question, we have to look at what point is the question no longer in her mind? When is she talking because of her train of thought and not because of something that's inspired by the question? She says, I've been good, which is a missing we. The missing we and the leave indicates true conflict here. Because this is a question about what is a definition. This doesn't necessarily tie back to any sort of direct time. All right, so why was it so important to cut her off here? Right. So what do you mean by he comes after you? Like, and she says, he gets belligerent, drunk. Like, I don't know if y'all have looked through my phone yet and seen many of the pictures and videos that I have taken. And at one point, I started documenting everything. So you all will see in my pictures, bloody fingers, split forehead, he split my nose. I've got this. Subject talks about George in present tense. He gets belligerently drunk. The correct tense would be he would get belligerently drunk. So again, she's still talking about him in present tense. So at one point, and I started. So she says, I started documenting everything. Now there's missing time here. So we have to notate that. We don't have any indicator yet of what is missing, but we know there's missing time. Like, I don't know is a deception tag for her. She took the pictures for future use, not present use. Okay, this is not analysis of verbiage, but it's analysis of reality that we have to keep in mind. She says, I don't know if y'all have looked through my phone yet and seen many of the pictures and videos that I have taken. And at one point, I started documenting everything. Okay, so she didn't take pictures of injuries so that she could go to the police and file a report. She says she started documenting everything, which means like she's making a documentary. This is information that she's storing for a later date. That is another strong indicator for borderline personality disorder, because part of that is wanting to be able to control your significant other, and having documented injuries is one way of doing that. The fact that this was not used for anything at that time is very problematic for her. And then she says, I've got this. I don't know where she was going with that, but I would really like to know what she's got. I got this. So let's see. Yeah, this indicates planning, which is an indicator, again, of borderline. Why are you still with him? Okay. Why are you still with him? Okay, first off, he's dead, so she's not still with him. Second, the interrogator is getting sucked into her reality. You want the subject to get sucked into your reality as the interrogator, the reality that you're creating. When you ask her, why are you still with him? And what are you getting at? Are you trying to create a defense for her? What are you doing? Where are you going with this? Anyways, she says, everybody asks me that. When I tell you guys this, I really love him like I do. And I feel like I can help him. Okay, everybody asks me this. This is a general statement. So it's possible that she's had that conversation. But if she's borderline personality, then she is creating this conversation. She will create conflict and then leave and talk to either her parents, his parents, someone like that, and talk about how bad he is to her. And then when they ask, well, why are you still with him? And she says, oh, but I really love him. She builds herself up as being the good guy and makes him look like the bad guy. We want to know, does that swing back and forth? Is he always the bad guy? Is he always the good guy? Is there one incident where that happens, or is this always swinging back and forth? And then she says, I feel like I can help him, which I did, because he came a really long way from where he was in Philadelphia to moving back to here and to dealing with everything else that he's been dealing with. We got problems here. So she says, first, we have an explanatory statement here. Then he has come a long way is present tense again. And that's problematic because he's dead. But then she switches and you're like, okay, did she finally realize he's dead? She says, he came a really long way from where he was in Philadelphia. She starts out by talking about how she helped him, like he's come emotionally a really long way. And then she switches to the right tense and then switches it to an actual geographic location as well. So she is not saying that he came a really long way emotionally. She's saying that he has come and then she switches it to Philadelphia, to moving back to here and to dealing with everything, another generic word, everything else he's been dealing with. I've really helped him. I bailed him out of jail, 3 times? I've gone to every single hearing and every single arraignment, everything that I did for him. Okay, she said numerous times, I really helped him. She says everything that I did for him, because she's not defining it, it doesn't mean anything. She says, I bailed him out of jail, went to every single arraignment that I did for him, gone to see all his public defenders. I've gone to the state. I did everything for him, everything. So I did everything for him, but she's only talking about being there during his legal trouble. So she creates his legal troubles and then she's there for him. Another classic indicator of borderline. Because I'm trying to help him. And then this is unintelligible. I don't know what she said here. And he was trying, really trying. And then he starts to think about things and I think he gets overwhelmed. And then it's like the next thing I know, he's drinking. Okay, interesting. He starts. So we have missing time here. We have 2 explanatory statements and starts to think about things. Okay, why is there missing time? Because she could have easily said this without the starts. He was really trying. He's really trying. He starts to think about things. Okay, so what is he leaving out? If she says he's really trying, but he sits down and he thinks about things, okay, without the start in there, that tells you a story. He sits down, he thinks about things, he gets lost in his own world, he falls into this depression. Like there's a storyline that she's insinuating that she's not saying. Instead, something starts. So what starts? And oftentimes when you see the word starts, there's some sort of violence, some sort of conflict starts. And it's like the next thing I know, he's drinking. Okay. So it's like, oh man, I know where this is going to go. Again, she's insinuating. She says, I know where this is going to go. That doesn't actually tell you anything. So don't insinuate anything here. So I'm going to go upstairs and read a book, or I'm going to go for a bike ride, or I'm going to do something. Okay. So now she's talking in very generic hypotheticals, something else and then she says, I don't want to drink. It's a negative statement. This is sensitive to her. I don't want to drink. Then she says, the occasional wine, whatever. She's actually double stamping it. The overemphasis is a deception tag for her. Then she says, well, the occasional wine, whatever. Like, that's okay. Then she goes on to say, or if it's a weekend, that's when you have a good time. So she's saying, I don't want to drink. I don't want to drink unless it's during the week, and then some wine or whatever means some wine or anything else. And then she says on the weekend, that's when you have a good time and get trashed. So what does I don't want to drink mean? It means she's trying to set that up as information that she wants you to have for something else. because it's not true. This is a lie that I don't want to drink. Why is she lying about this? That's what we want to figure out here. You don't have to wake up the next day. Okay, that's a negative statement in conjunction with the drinking and the I don't want to drink, I don't want to drink. Because over the weekend, you don't have to wake up the next day and do things. I have to tend to Lucas. I have to take him to school. I guess what she's insinuating is she doesn't want to get so trashed that she can't get up the next morning during the week. Okay, I have to take him to school. I had all this stuff to do. He doesn't know how to, I guess, maintain himself. And it's unclear here whether she's talking about Lucas or George. Her son is Lucas, where I can do 50 things at once and still know the 50 things more previously prior that I need to get done. Now, again, she's really talking herself up. There's an element of narcissism with her too. He can't process like that. He didn't process like that. It's still possible that she could be talking about Lucas, but this seems to be referring back to him thinking about things and getting overwhelmed. So it looks like when she says he doesn't know how to, I guess, maintain himself, I think she has jumped back to George here. He didn't process like that. So we got a bunch of negative statements in here. And then we have an explanatory. Now we have he didn't process like that. He can't process like that. So he would literally, not literally, but had smoke coming out his ears. We have a negative followed by an explanatory statement here. That's problematic. Now we have a strong indicator of deception here. So now we have another explanatory statement. The next thing you know, he doesn't want to deal with it. I'm going to go get something to drink. Okay, this is one of the most key parts of this. This is why we focus so heavily on what people actually say. She says, so the next thing you know, he doesn't want to deal with it. Then she says, I'm going to go get something to drink. While she's insinuating that that's what he says, that's not what she says. She is the person that I refers to. She says, I'm going to go get something to drink. So the majority of the time, I would hang out outside or do something else because I don't want to drink. Now we have an explanatory plus a negative because I don't want to drink. That is way too direct here. This is definitely deceptive. We have a bunch of indicators. We got negative statements, negative statements, negative statement. We got explanatory, negative there. Then we got, see how they're all coming together here? And then it culminates in because I don't want to drink. Now, she doesn't want to drink, but he starts drinking and then he gets out of control. And she says, I'm going to go get something to drink. What this paragraph has told me is that when he comes home and he has a lot of stuff on his mind and he's trying to process it, that she begins to drink in order to get him to drink. And then once they're both drinking, that gives her an element of control. Now she can do what she wants to do. She can get him out of control. She can make him violent and do things to her so she can record it for her documentary and whatnot. And every time his job broke his heart, and it made me sad because he had so much pride in his job and the store that he took care of so much totally went downhill, and that broke his heart because he had put so much work and effort into fixing it up, and his manager was awful and basically gave up on all the employees. So I think that had a huge bearing on why he would drink so much. Well, she's just told us why. It had a bearing, but the reason why he drank so much is because he would have a tough time at work and then she would start drinking. Then she says, his ex-wife is bonkers. She was all over him all the time. Send me money, send me money, send me money. How can I send you money when I don't have a job? And he's still trying to take care of me and Lucas by paying a bill here or there, getting some groceries. All right, so now we have that flipping back and forth. He's a really good guy. Oh, he beats me. Oh, he's a really good guy. He's trying to help me and Lucas by paying bills and getting groceries. So he always had something on his mind, which is why, again, I got the puzzles and the paint to try to get him off of it so we don't have a drink or he doesn't have a drink. All right, this again now is an explanatory statement plus a negative statement talking about drinking. That's deceptive. We have this again here. So when you all see my phone, you can see all of the damage he has done to me and the videos of him smashing my television because he's belligerently drunk, where most of the time I just don't want to be there. And I try to help him. I try to calm him down. Eventually, he just pops out. All right. At this point, it's pretty clear that she has borderline personality and she is trying to present an image that she doesn't like to drink, but then she accidentally sort of explains to you that she gets trashed on the weekends and still drinks to the point of not getting totally trashed during the week, which means her not wanting to drink is a total lie. And that she drinks when he has a bad day and gets him drunk and then documents the stuff that happens after that. Okay, that's what we know so far. This is why you have to let people talk. You see this? They finally didn't interrupt. And the question was, then why are you still with him? She wants to tell you, she wants to give the whole story here. You just have to let her say it. Just let her get the story out. Any small question is going to allow her to start talking, which is all you need. Subject uses everybody, everything, something, anybody, nobody, when she is fabricating and can't come up with a detail fast enough. This is a signal of deception. So we see that here. I'm going to do something and going to state I did everything for him. This is when she's trying to present a story to you and it's just too many details, so she glosses over details. This statement is generally filled with negative and explanatory statements, which means this is deception. Because I don't want to drink, we identified that. So he doesn't want to deal with it. I'm going to get something to drink. She says, I'm going to get something to drink, so we don't have to drink because he's drunk. So all of these are explanatory statements with drinking, explanatory, drinking, explanatory, I'm going to get something to drink, drinking, all explanatory plus negatives because I don't want to drink. So there's 4 indicators in there. Okay, what we've learned so far. Subject definitely has BPD. She has her own reality. He is still alive in her reality, and she still uses present tense. She makes him dependent on her by getting him drunk and then always bailing him out. She controls him by getting him drunk, either injuring herself or antagonizing him into injuring her, and then documenting it as leverage. Remember, she doesn't document it for the moment. If your significant other in a domestic violence incident, in that moment, beats you up, and then you take pictures of it, call the police, and the police come and you give them the pictures, that's good. That's what you should do. But that's not what she's doing. She's documenting them all and keeping them for herself. That shows motive and planning for something. That's not her as a victim. That's her as somebody who is actually the one that's in control of the situation here. It's just important to understand that. She portrays herself publicly as the savior. She calls herself smart, put together. She advertises that she is the victim. Yesterday, you made it sound like you guys were just drinking a glass or two. You obviously had the bottle, but you told me that you were not drunk. He was not drunk. And she says, I can't get drunk at number 1. I do not want to get drunk. I don't like being non-compos mentis, having my wits about myself. I don't like feeling out of control. So I'm just saying you're making it sound like he's a raging alcoholic today. Interesting. This wasn't about him. You told me you were not drunk. The you were not drunk came first, which means it's of higher importance than the he was not drunk. And she says, I can't get drunk. That's really, really interesting because it shows a complete disassociation with reality here. I can't get drunk? What is that? Who would even say that? Then she says, I do not want to get drunk. So she is uncontracting the denial here. I do not want to get drunk because she does want to get drunk. She has a plan, and her plan involves getting both of them drunk. Then she says, I don't like being non-compos mentis. Okay, that's a legal term. And then she says, having your wits about yourself. So she has heard this before. They've been arrested before for domestic violence. They have a history. So she has learned that term through the legal system. Then she says, I don't like feeling out of control. It's a negative statement followed by an explanatory statement. So when she says, I don't like feeling out of control, it's a deceptive statement because that's her plan, is to get out of control, is to get him out of control. And then she says, so I'm just saying you're making it sound like he's a raging alcoholic today. So that's disassociated. I mean, she doesn't even say you're making it sound like I'm a raging alcoholic today. I mean, he's not even alive today. So there's just so many things wrong with this. Anyways, so there are 6 negative statements in here. There's an explanatory statement, which equals one big fat lie. And that lie is that I don't like feeling out of control. That means all of that is planned by her. All right. Now, I fixed most of the questions so that they don't sound like this, but some of these I left like this so you can see what these questions look like and how is the subject supposed to determine what the question is here. You're not, you know, so, but you guys were both sober on Sunday to your knowledge, because when I said you went and passed out, you were like, no, I didn't pass out. I just fell asleep. So now it's kind of like, what is it? Where are you? Where are you guys drinking? So you've got numerous questions in here. Anyways, so Sunday was one of the better days that we have had in quite some time. Okay, earlier she said that they haven't had any issues. It's been really good for the last month, for the last 3 to 4 weeks. That's what she said earlier. Now she says Sunday was one of the better days that they've had in quite some time. He's dancing with my dog. You can see that too on the pictures, him loving the dog. So it changed from my dog to the dog, which is really interesting because everyone says my dog. Dog is one of those things that's possessive. It is always your dog, just like your gun, your money. There are certain things that are always yours, your phone. So when she says he's dancing with my dog, for one thing, that's present tense. And she says my dog. So in the present tense, it's her dog. You can see that too on the pictures, him loving the dog. So in the pictures, which is in the past tense, the dog is no longer her dog. He loves the dog and dancing around, having a good time and just being happy kind of thing. He doesn't know I can't. I mean, so we got a sentence fragment. We got two negatives in a sentence fragment here. I mean, I can get like maybe 2-3 glasses of wine and I'll be fine. So just randomly now we're jumping back to the wine. And she's saying 3 glasses of wine doesn't affect her at all. But I have to have my wits about myself because I don't know what to expect. Oof. She just gave us some good information here. Because I don't know what to expect, that is a explanatory statement plus a negative, which means that's the lie here. We have 2 negatives with the sentence fragment. And then because I don't know what to expect, which means this is planned. So we had an indicator that this stuff was planned. And now we're getting more definitive confirmation that in fact, this is very much her plan. And that the dog was the dog before he died and my dog after. All right, so borderline personality, have to be the only person in their significant other's life. The jealousy is wild and it includes pets. Well, let's talk about Sunday. How many glasses of wine did you have? How many glasses of wine did he have? The bottle was gone. I mean, I don't know if you poured any out. Okay, is the interrogator her defense attorney? Why did she say that? Why would you give the person that you're asking let me compose myself here. When you're trying to get an answer to how drunk she was and how much she had been drinking, when you give her a possible out, it's only for the purpose of giving her the out. You can't say, well, I threw that in there because if that's what happened, that's what happened. Well, the thing is that if that's not what happened, she's not going to think about that. And if it is what happened, she's going to think about that anyways. So there's no reason to put that in there as the interrogator. The only possible reason to put that in would be to give her an excuse to say that she poured it out and that she wasn't drunk, which would be a lie, but it would be repeating something that she said, which makes it much easier to do. So it's just god awful, just terrible questioning. But she says, no, that was from previous. That doesn't actually mean anything. No, that was from previous. How many glasses of wine did you have? And she says, no, that was from previous. So this sentence, it's a sentence fragment. She's implying that the wine was left over, but that's a lie because she doesn't say that it was left over. She says that was from previous. But the sentence doesn't say anything, and it definitely doesn't answer the question. That shows a tremendous amount of sensitivity around how much she had drank, which at this point we know he'd had a bad day, and she got him trashed. And that was her plan, to get him trashed. So where were you guys on drunkenness? Not drunkenness on Sunday, and you told us you weren't drunk. Okay, they're fixating on the alcohol thing. No, I was not drunk, okay? That's uncontracted denial, which means she definitely was. I was not drunk, so she double stamps it and gives us the uncontracted denial twice, just in case you were curious if, because she has said it numerous times, even though there's been no accusation in here that she was drunk, just the fact that she talked about it a couple of times, you could see the uncontraction, but double stamping it is too much. So she was drunk. So with him, with is an indicator of conflict here. So with him, I don't know. I is repeating I. That's sensitivity. And you've seen in her baseline here, she does not repeat words ever. She never says I. So that is something we definitely want to notate. So with him, I don't know. I know when it's like, okay, man, where I told him, slow down. It's starting to catch up with you. Slow down, slow down. And another thing too is I don't like listening to music with him because he gets too involved in the music. We have with him. So we have conflict right from the beginning. So with. And then she says, I don't know. I know when it's like, okay, man, where I told him slow down. All right. So that's what she's lying about. She very specifically wants to say that she told him to drink less, but it's so difficult to lie. There's so much stress around that it creates a bunch of indicators right before she says the lie. So I was not uncontracted. And then she says, I don't know. And then she says, I. It's starting to catch up with you. So starting, we have missing time. What's missing? Well, it was her starting to drink and getting him to drink. So now we know what the starting is. The starting is her starting to drink and getting him to drink a lot. Now we get the slow down, okay, overemphasizing the slow down. And another thing too is I don't like listening to music. So that's out of the blue, just wild left field. Whew. Don't like listening to music with him. So conflict again, because explanatory statement, he gets too involved in the music. Interesting. She's blaming him. Anything that draws his attention away from her is going to be problematic for her.